Hi everyone, famous YouTuber Ultra still here.
Hey, wait a minute. Ah, that's much better. Hey guys, Ultra still here. It's been a while since I've been making videos on this channel, but there's been video game related news this year that has caught my attention. The Legend of Zelda is one of the most beloved franchises in gaming, and I often enjoy seeing people talk about the gameplay, level design, music, and lore. Overall, I love how this fantasy world has positively impacted people's enjoyments of their lives, as it can serve as a vehicle for escapism. I would love to think that all people would agree with me that The Legend of Zelda is a franchise meant for fantasy and entertainment, but this year, some individuals tried to tie it to real-world politics, which really contradicts its use as a vehicle for escapism and enjoyment. The people I am referring to are people like popular YouTuber Skitty who views a certain race from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time through an Orientalist lens, and suggests it is a racist portrayal. The concept of Orientalism will be discussed in a moment. My overall concern is that people like Skitty and Bia, aka Silent Princess on X, are insinuating that the aesthetic of the in-world cultural context of this race should be pursued with better cultural research because they claim that these approaches, with a lack of research, promote harmful stereotypes of certain real-world cultures, such as people in the Middle East. The fictional group of people that I'm referring to is the Gerudo. Before I begin, I can't stress this enough. No, I'm unfortunately not joking that this discussion is a real thing. I wish it were all just a joke, but no, sadly some people in this day and age find the depiction of the Gerudo to be offensive and problematic. So without further ado, let's begin. So, months back, this topic of Gerudo being racist was trending on social media, mainly X, and I was dumbfounded that such a topic was even being discussed. I found Skitty discussing the topic, and I tried to ask her what the deal was about this regarding her video titled What's Wrong with the Gerudo? A response to Octorok reviews. And here's what she had to say.
I just want to say that this site has been abuzz with Gerudo Orientalism discourse, and still not a single person has been advocating for them to be removed from the games. At the absolute most, people are talking about a more well-researched redesign.
And then I said, honest question, Skitty, but when people have mentioned Zelda for decades, when have people ever been this hyper-fixated on its inspiration from real-world religion or politics as the dominant discussion? Isn't Zelda supposed to be a work of fiction separate from reality? And then she said,
this has never been the dominant discussion. That doesn't mean that it's not a conversation worth having. If you don't care, you don't have to participate. It's that simple.
And believe me, after that exchange, I decided to care quite a bit, and I am participating. And I want to address your argument on if the Gerudo are truly Orientalist, like you are stating. A bit later, I went to X and responded to her again recently, last month in June, to mention that looking at Gerudo through the subjective lens she's viewing them is basically absurd.
Orientalism is inherently problematic. What are you even talking about? But as for the Gerudo specifically, making your Middle Eastern coded characters an entire tribe of mid-rift faring thieves who fight with scimitars is indeed racist.
You'll see that according to YouTuber Skitty, her answer is not to remove or retcon the Gerudo from the game, or so she says.
Just to clarify what I actually believe, yes, I do think the depiction of the Gerudo in the Zelda series is leaning hard on Orientalist tropes. I think that's especially true of their appearance in Ocarina of Time.
Anyway, she thinks this fictional race of people is leaning hard on Orientalist tropes, and that then makes them racist depictions. Also, I am responding to Skitty specifically because of how popular she is, and how Nintendo may notice her argument towards the Gerudo and implement unnecessary changes. And so, I felt compelled to address this topic because popular people like her could influence the promotion of this topic and even convince Nintendo to alter the design of the Gerudo and recontextualize their aesthetic. With all that in mind, in this video, we are going to explore Skitty's video and see what she means and whether her argument is objective or not, and if people like her are justified in altering the Gerudo. Disclaimer: I will still give Skitty's explanations credit where it is applicable. This video is not really meant to attack her personally, but it is, instead, to critique her argument and perspective towards the Gerudo and others on this topic of Orientalism. So please refrain from harassing her, her fans, or anyone else mentioned in this video. This video is mainly intended to protect a fantastical race in a video game from potentially being changed in the future due to the over-application of real-world politics to fantasy. Part 1. Argument for why the Gerudo are not Middle Eastern stand-ins. So, let's commence by allowing Skitty to explain the situation regarding the Gerudo controversy.
Hi everyone, famous YouTuber Skitty here. For a while now, I've wanted to make a video about the portrayal of the Gerudo in the Zelda series. I love to examine, criticize, and interrogate works of art that are important to me, and the Zelda games are no exception. Octorok Reviews released In Defense of the Gerudo, a nearly 30-minute long video that, while never mentioning me by name, shows screenshots of my tweets and was clearly prompted by our little exchange.
I mean, Octorok Reviews did at least try to keep things professional and blurred out your name. He didn't even frame the video to target you specifically. It was more about the topic of the Gerudo depictions being problematic in general. By the way, I don't think you're the only popular person in the Zelda community. Anyway, please explain the situation of the Gerudo.
So, to recap, I made an offhand comment as part of a completely unrelated post. This guy showed up in my mentions accusing me of hating the Gerudo, and now he's parlayed the argument that followed into a 27-minute long video defending them. The bad news is that he doesn't seem to understand what people are actually talking about when they criticize the Gerudo, especially their portrayal in Ocarina of Time. But the good news is that now I have an excuse to talk about a topic I think is really interesting. So this video is a response to Octorok Reviews, but it's also about the Gerudo, Orientalism in the Zelda series, and what I think can be done to remedy some of the issues with them going forward. Spoiler alert, the answer isn't to remove or retcon them from the game. Speaking of which, the biggest problem with Octo's argument is that it's predicated on a misrepresentation of what I actually believe. Throughout his video, he claims repeatedly that some sinister group of performative Zelda fans is advocating for the Gerudo to be removed from the series.
So color me surprised when I learned that certain parts of the fandom not only don't like the Gerudo, but actively campaign for the removal or complete retcon of their culture and storytelling, and thus advocate for the removal from the series.
To be fair towards Octorok Reviews, I think he's just concerned about the Zelda franchise being potentially changed due to political correctness. After seeing some recent examples of this stuff even affecting The Legend of Zelda, I don't blame him for thinking this. I'll cover this political correctness later, don't worry. But you have a point. Octorok may have misunderstood what you meant here, and yes, he may be analyzing the Zelda games critically, but he's not insinuating changing anything for reasons about trivial, politically correct issues. This is still a fictional video game series we're discussing, right? Not a real-world simulator? Anyway, after Skitty mentions that important tidbit, we're going to skip ahead to her clarifying her stance on the Gerudo's involvement in the Zelda series.
There was never any discussion of removing or retconning the Gerudo out of the Zelda series at any point, so what is this actually about? What is the point of this video? In Defense of the Gerudo honestly feels like some sort of temporal anomaly. Hand-wringing about politically motivated fake fans who want to censor your video games is so 10 years ago.
I mean, in recent years, some video games still have been getting censored due to political correctness, so your statement is not really convincing.
I was under the impression that serious people broadly accepted that video games, like any art form, are sometimes subject to critical analysis through socio-political lenses. It's been like this for decades.
I mean, there are a lot of lenses that you can view video games from. That's true of most art in general. What does that even mean? You're not implying that those lenses automatically recontextualize the art into something it's not, are you? If so, that is not a road you want to go down, Skitty.
One of the articles I read for this video that argued the importance of studying video games through the lenses of race and gender was published in 2006. This isn't some current-day culture war nonsense.
Yeah, that seems like that's what you're insinuating. You are going to regret that severely.
But I suppose everything feels new if you haven't been paying attention. Just to clarify what I actually believe, yes, I do think the depiction of the Gerudo in the Zelda series is leaning hard on Orientalist tropes. I think that's especially true of their appearance in Ocarina of Time. I still love the Zelda series, and I don't think Nintendo did this out of some conscious will to do harm. I don't think the developers of these games are evil racist monsters.
Okay, so now that we've established that Skitty doesn't think that Nintendo had malicious intent regarding the real-world inspirations involved in the creation of the Gerudo. Keep that in mind, because this is going to be very important to come back to later. Because here, Skitty accidentally admits that Nintendo is not attempting to frame the Gerudo for real-life Middle Eastern stand-ins.
And I don't think the solution here is to write the Gerudo out of the canon and pretend they never existed. I do think there are respectful ways for fantasy writers and designers to borrow from real-life cultures, and we'll talk about that later in this video, but the Gerudo have historically fallen short in this regard. They've changed a lot over the years, mostly for the better, but there are still some issues that are worth criticizing. There's nothing wrong with enjoying a story or game that has problematic aspects, and there's also nothing wrong with highlighting or interrogating those aspects. When people discuss these sorts of things, it's almost always an expression of love and care.
Okay, some of what Skitty believes sounds reasonable on the surface. However, she has ideas of how to represent these cultures respectfully, so stay tuned for that later. Also, another thing to note is that she also says that while she doesn't want them removed or retconned, she will later insinuate changing their designs in future games, and to conduct careful research into Middle Eastern cultures to avoid offending them, which concerns me because even if she wants iterative improvements, the premise that current designs are harmful stereotypes is flawed. We will get to that discussion though. Moving on with the video, she then discusses Orientalism, and we are going to use her definition of the word to see where she's coming from on this claim of the Gerudo being racist.
Before we proceed, I think it's important to define the word at the heart of this discussion, Orientalism. Actually, before we do that, let's ask an even more basic question. What is the Orient? The English word Orient comes from the Latin word oriens, which means east, so the Orient is the east. Got it. Follow-up question, east of where? Well, east of Europe, specifically Asia and parts of North Africa, but that's ultimately arbitrary. The Earth is round. You could theoretically draw a line dividing east from west anywhere you like. But of course, when you colonize the world, when you draw the maps, everything gets to revolve around you. So that's the Orient. What about Orientalism? It's impossible to discuss Orientalism without discussing the work of Palestinian-American author Edward Said, whose 1978 book, Orientalism, reshaped how countless people, from well-respected academics to third-rate video essayists like myself, understand the East as a Western construct. Orientalism, the book, can be a dense and difficult text, and if I spend too long talking about theory, nobody's going to sit through this video.
Understood. Thank you for the heads up, Skitty Bitty.
Basically, Orientalism is a system that invents the East as a concept so that it can be described, understood, and dominated by the West. Putting these definitions together, Orientalism can be most easily explained in 3 steps. Step 1. Divide the world into the West and the East, with the starting assumption that the West is, as Said puts it, rational, peaceful, liberal, logical, capable of holding real values without natural suspicion, and that the East is none of those things. Step 2. Study the East so that you can represent the East. What's important here is that you never even consider the possibility of Eastern people representing themselves. And finally, step 3, use your representation of the East as justification for conquering it. That's still 3 whole things to keep track of, so let's make it even simpler. Orientalism is a way of representing the East as something fundamentally exotic, but ultimately knowable from the outside.
Okay, that's a very straightforward definition. We will hold on to this meaning of the word Orientalism. So she then goes on to say that even something inaccurately depicting Middle Eastern culture positively can still be considered Orientalist.
But would the Gerudo even need to be negative or racist depictions of Middle Eastern people to be considered Orientalist? No! The real reason the Gerudo are Orientalist is because they borrow from a vague, quote-unquote, Middle Eastern aesthetic specifically to communicate their otherness.
And Skitty's next clip is going to basically demonstrate what's wrong with how the Gerudo are othered.
One of the weirdest things about Octo's video is that a huge chunk of it is dedicated specifically to defending the Gerudo as they appear in Ocarina of Time, at their least nuanced and most Orientalist. Hell, even his initial tweet praised the Gerudo specifically for their role as a quote-unquote tragic other in Ocarina's story. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with having a character or even a group of characters in a fictional setting that exists to give an outsider's perspective on the society in which the story takes place. The problem arises when that difference is communicated using symbolism loaded with historical political baggage. If you're not compelled by the argument that this perpetuates harmful ideas about real-world people, at least consider that it's lazy world-building. After all, you don't need to write a fleshed-out group of outsiders if you can just plaster your fictional race with iconography that's historically been used to denote the other. Octo's video actually demonstrates very well how effective this tactic is, because he repeatedly makes claims about the Gerudo that, rather than being rooted in the text of the game, are based on assumptions he makes about them as a result of the tropes and visual language used in their design.
Okay, Skitty, I see where you're going with this Orientalist argument, but there's one teensy tiny problem. The Gerudo aren't trying to be Middle Eastern, nor do they reside in the Middle East, so they cannot be Orientalist or racist! I wish I could end the video here, but I need to destroy her points one by one. Skitty then goes on to describe that we are not given any insight into the Gerudo stealing anything.
Let's start by asking a simple question. What do we know about the Gerudo in Ocarina of Time? The answer is actually not a whole lot. We know they live in the Gerudo Desert at the western edge of Hyrule. We know they're all women, with the exception of one man born every 100 years, who, by law, rules over them as their king. And we know that they're referred to as thieves. That's pretty much all we get in the actual text of the game, but you wouldn't know it by listening to Octo talk about them. According to him, the Gerudo are actually a tragic, misunderstood group of people who only resort to thievery because they live in the desert and have no other choice. Here's the problem. That's fanfiction.
Actually, Skitty, there is an instance of the Gerudo stealing. The carpenters that are captured in the Gerudo's fortress are a clear example of them stealing, albeit stealing people.
Despite the constant references to the Gerudo being thieves, we're never given examples of any of them besides Ganondorf actually stealing anything, let alone any kind of insight into their motivation. Octo says,
There's both a combination of direct banditry and feminine wild that they utilize to survive. And yes, I do say survive, because the lands they come from are so barren and inhospitable that their theft is, in fact, done out of necessity in most cases. Ocarina of Time makes that rather clear.
But it doesn't. None of what he just said is reflected in the text of Ocarina of Time. Instead, he's making an assumption about what motivates the Gerudo based solely on the fact that they're thieves who live in the desert, which, to be clear, is exactly why the Gerudo are depicted as thieves who live in the desert.
Couple things. Skitty will eventually mention that the Gerudo don't seem to be able to engage in trade. I'm going to be discussing that more in depth in part 2 of this video. But basically, we will get to that, and I just want to address that Octo had a point with his inference of the Gerudo resorting to thievery because of the Gerudo region being inhospitable. The Gerudo region in Ocarina of Time, at least, is in fact inhospitable. There is in-game evidence. Firstly, there is a warning sign at the entrance of the Haunted Wasteland that implies that those without a guide will be swallowed by the desert. Then, before making his way into the wasteland, Link is told by one of the Gerudo that he must overcome 2 trials if he is to make it to the Desert Colossus, which is his next destination. If we look at the specifics of the trials that Link must overcome when he is in the Haunted Wasteland, we see that Link must venture past shifting sands that can cause him to sink, and that he must rely on a Poe to guide him through the sandstorm. Additionally, when Link enters the wasteland, we see what awaits him. There is a sign next to a sales merchant on a carpet with a description that implies that it is reckless to even consider venturing in the desert, thus suggesting that it is inhospitable. There is also evidence outside of the game to further support that the Gerudo Valley is inhospitable. If we look at the official Nintendo Power Guide for more context, it gives very blatant proof that the Gerudo Wasteland is dangerous. Furthermore, in a sequel to Ocarina of Time, like The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, if we look at Ganondorf's dialogue regarding him discussing the desolate nature of his homeland, we see him implying that the region that the Gerudo resided in brought suffering and ruin. So with all that in mind, it is very reasonable to deduce why Octorok thinks the Gerudo had to resort to theft out of necessity. I think Nintendo's approach with othering the Gerudo in this sense gives them complexity and supports why they were misunderstood and initially given a bad rep. And so, I don't think it's a problem. There are more reasons why they are misunderstood that will be addressed shortly. Before we resume the video, I want to bring up the importance of recontextualization and why it's so important regarding the Gerudo. This is going to be very important moving forward as we dismantle Skitty's argument about the Gerudo being Middle Eastern coded stereotypes. For Skitty will appear to have trouble understanding that Nintendo is recontextualizing the Gerudo to be their own thing. The Gerudo aren't real after all. Moving on to Skitty's other issues regarding the Gerudo's aesthetics, if we look at Skitty's X post regarding why the Gerudo are racist, again, this is her context on why.
He also says that the Gerudo have aspects of their culture dictated by Middle Eastern elements, but like, what does that even mean? If he's talking about their veils, curved blades, pointy shoes, bare midriffs, and baggy pants, those aren't Middle Eastern elements, they're costume pieces specifically chosen to highlight their otherness.
Wait a minute. First of all, what you're saying here contradicts what you said earlier in your post about the Middle Eastern coded characters of an entire tribe of midriff-bearing thieves who fight with scimitars, and you said that it's racist. You see, in your original X post, you basically implied that this explicitly frames the Gerudo as being Middle Eastern coded, and that you called the combination of traits, including the exotic outfit elements, racist. Here in this clip, you're basically downplaying the same elements as generic costume pieces for othering, denying they are specifically Middle Eastern, like you implied in your original X post. So, which one is it? Are the Gerudos stereotypes against Middle Easterners? Yes or no? Because you cannot have it both ways. Sorry. Anyway, once again, Skitty, they are not Middle Eastern stand-ins, so this is a non-issue still. Okay, so let's take a look at an image of the Gerudo, and you guys tell me, does that really look like it's trying to be an Orientalist stand-in? What do you see? Because all I can see is a fictional character with red hair. The last thing I think, at least I personally, about is that it is trying to represent real-world Middle Easterners. And I played this game for 25 years at least. Skitty, on the other hand, may view this image of the Gerudo as a racial stereotype of Middle Eastern people, but I just see it as a fictional character from a video game, and I'm hoping others view it the same as I do. The Gerudo, to me, do nothing to make me think any more or any less of the Middle East and its peoples. So it's all subjective.
If you're thinking at this point that there's no way the developers thought that hard about this, I actually agree. I don't think this was done deliberately because Nintendo is racist. I think it was done because these Orientalist tropes have been reproduced so many times that people often don't think twice about including them in their work, which is exactly why it's so important to be thoughtful and to grapple with our own unconscious biases. Octo spends a considerable portion of his video trying to answer the question of whether the Gerudo are even meant to represent real-life Middle Eastern people in the first place. And while one look at their design is enough to lean towards yes, the real answer is that it doesn't actually matter.
Okay, so from that clip alone, Skitty Bitty concludes that the Gerudo are meant to represent Middle Easterners by their aesthetic designs. And it actually does matter if Nintendo has the intent to frame them as Middle Eastern stand-ins. I can't stress this enough, I won't speak for everybody, but of all the times that I played Ocarina of Time over the decades, not once did I look at this fantastical race of desert dwellers that have red hair and have 20 years sometimes in the series, and equate them to racist depictions. The Gerudo were clearly not called anything relating to actual Middle Easterners in-game. Why? Because the Gerudo aren't trying to be Arabs, Iranian, or Muslim. The Gerudo are trying to be the Gerudo. They're not trying to represent anything or anyone real. Like, come on, I can't believe I'm even making a video on this comparison. Look, I can't control how Skitty looks at the Gerudo, but I think she really blew the end product out of proportion by not differentiating between clear fantasy and reality by equating them to racist stereotypes when they are not even claiming to be real people, for they constitute a fictional race. So Skitty Bitty is wrong. It actually does matter if the Gerudo aren't trying to meet Middle Eastern standards. Her entire argument would rely on the premise that the Gerudo are inserts for Middle Easterners, which they are not. But the Gerudo are a fictional race that Nintendo recontextualized from Orientalist concepts, and so this argument is by definition psychotic. To specify though, if Skitty is only arguing that the Gerudo were inspired by Orientalist concepts, okay, that's fine. I can see why she'd say that. However, to suggest that the Gerudo are racist depictions of Middle Easterners via Orientalism is still incorrect because the Gerudo are trying to be a fictional race in a video game, not Middle Eastern folk. This game is called The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It's not titled as a Middle Eastern representation documentary. On the contrary, if the Gerudo were trying to be Middle Easterners, then yes, I'd be agreeing with Skitty Bitty here. Don't get me wrong, I see how she's trying to analyze the game from her socio-political lens, and I ultimately get what she means, but she seems to have trouble realizing that this race is trying to be their own thing, not actual people in real life. By the way, going back to when I showed Skitty Bitty this image of the Gerudo on X, if you were to look at an image of the Gerudo and the first thought that comes to mind is that the Gerudo are literally racist, that is going to make a lot of people potentially give you weird looks. I strongly discourage this hyperfixation on racial coding in fantasy because at worst, it may make you look racist. At best, it's still subjective even to view the Gerudo as racist stand-ins from Middle Easterners, which they're not again. For example, that's like looking at another fictional race from Zelda, like some of the Deku scrubs from another Zelda game, like Majora's Mask, and thinking they're racist stereotypes for the Suri tribe from Ethiopia, or calling the aesthetic of the Deku scrubs cultural appropriation. At least if you were to look at the similarities of the flower aesthetics between the two peoples. As you can see, just like the Deku race, the Gerudo race is also fake, and in contrast, the Suri tribe from Ethiopia and Middle Eastern people are both real, existing people. Thus, this kind of forced mapping cheapens both the fiction and real cultures by reducing them to aesthetics, so I don't recommend that. These are fantastical races in Zelda that are trying to be separate from the real world. Deku scrubs aren't human, like the Suri tribe is, and likewise, Middle Easterners don't have pointy ears like some of the Gerudo do. At least in later installments, more of them have pointy ears. Also, I need to clarify this. I am not claiming that Deku Scrub were inspired by the Suri tribe. I made this comparison specifically so that you realize the point I was trying to make. Now, Nintendo may take from the real world and then recontextualize it to be its own harmless, fantastical product in the end. And that Skitty's argument of how the races in Zelda can be viewed is massively flawed. So the Gerudo, as a fictional race, are fine. Neither they nor the Deku are trying to offend any real-life people or culture. However, to Steelman Skitty Bitty's argument, if Nintendo wanted to, there could be a case for them trying to be offensive and make a race a stand-in for real-world stereotypes, but the Gerudo aren't attempting to symbolize that. That's another argument. Anywho, this separate argument will be further explained in part 3 of the video. Besides, regarding the Gerudo, there is ample evidence that Nintendo did not intend them to be a racist stereotype of anything Oriental, because you'll notice that in the first versions of Ocarina of Time, there is a lot of explicit Oriental inspiration, like Islamic symbols and the Fire Temple chant. However, as Skitty previously admitted, Nintendo did not intend for this approach to be harmful. What Nintendo tried to do was take inspiration from many Middle Eastern cultures and create a fictional race out of it. The inspirational approach could be considered Oriental, true, but the Gerudo themselves are melded into something being distinguished from the real world, making them non-problematic. As mentioned before, just because something is inspired by real-world elements doesn't mean the final product mirrors that. For example, the first Zelda games had Christian imagery and iconography. Does that then make the first few Legend of Zelda games Christian games? I don't think so, but one can still say that they are inspired by Christianity. Sure, this too will be discussed in part 3. We will be using this contrast between the Orientalist and Christian ideas to illustrate how inspiration does not necessarily correlate to reality, and it is clear by Nintendo's explicit intent to distance itself from real-world cultures. Before we address the inspiration and recontextualization of cultures and religions in art, we must first mention Skitty's perspective on how the Gerudo are depicted as another in Ocarina of Time.
He also says that the Gerudo have aspects of their culture dictated by Middle Eastern elements, but like, what does that even mean? If he's talking about their veils, curved blades, pointy shoes, bare midriffs, and baggy pants, those aren't Middle Eastern elements, they're costume pieces specifically chosen to highlight their otherness.
Once again, Skitty, they are not Middle Eastern stand-ins, so this is a non-issue still.
Let's pretend he didn't bring up Kimba, thus tacitly admitting that Nintendo being Japanese doesn't actually have any bearing on their capacity to reproduce Orientalist tropes. For starters, the Zelda series has been steeped in the aesthetic of Western medieval fantasy since its inception, whether as a result of the Westernization that began to take hold in Japan in the Meiji period, a deliberate attempt to market to the Western audience that has always been responsible for the overwhelming majority of the Zelda series sales, or both. In the first Legend of Zelda game, Link had a cross on his shield, and the Book of Magic was straight up called the Bible in the Japanese version. Zelda 2 featured a cross as an obtainable item.
Yep, it's true. Those first few Zelda games did have inspirations from Christianity.
Obtainable item. A Link to the Past was the first game in the series to move towards an in-universe religion, introducing
Yep, they took inspirations from those things and then they recontextualized something. Where are you going with this, by the way, Skitty? I'm wondering.
universe religion, introducing the golden goddesses and emphasizing the Triforce as a symbol of worship, but an official piece of concept art for the game featured Link kneeling in front of a crucifix.
I hope you're not insinuating that just because they took inspirations from those things that they're trying to be those things. Don't do it, Skitty. Don't do it!
All of this context, is it really so nonsensical to see Ocarina of Time's Ganondorf, a wicked man of the desert who seeks to conquer the Holy Land, the Sacred Realm?
Ganondorf is trying to conquer the Holy Land? You're gonna regret making that connection, Skitty. You'll soon see why. Part 2. The depiction of the Gerudo as an other in Ocarina of Time. To focus on the Gerudo themselves, and for time's sake, we're going to skip ahead in Skitty's video to focus on this topic, in which she hates how the Gerudo are depicted as another. To recap what she mentioned earlier, Skitty says the issue regarding the Gerudo is that they borrow from a very vague Oriental aesthetic to communicate their otherness. Furthermore, Skitty hates their depiction as an other here because you can actually attack them, unlike many other of the races in Ocarina of Time.
Speaking of European imagery, you might argue that it's hypocritical to take issue with the way the Gerudo are depicted, but not with the European-inspired Hylians. And to that, I'd urge you to look at the difference in how the two groups are presented. Hylian characters are treated as the default humans, with most of them having unique character models and distinct personalities. The Gerudo, on the other hand, are treated as perpetual outsiders who, with the exception of Ganondorf, his mothers, and Nabooru, share the same three character models. Not only are they treated as interchangeable, they're the only human characters Link can attack.
She also states that there is a lack of unique models for the Gerudo, as you just saw, and that many of them look identical to one another, but to be honest, this is also true of the Zoras and Gorons as well, so I don't see this as a strong argument for them being othered. Additionally, Skitty doesn't seem to understand why much of Hyrule's other citizens dislike the Gerudo.
And you can even borrow a Gerudo mask at the Happy Mask Shop, prompting certain characters to cry out in fear or tell you how much they hate Gerudos.
In this part of the video, we're going to really go over why the other parts of the Hyrule denizens seem to dislike the Gerudo, and we're going to go over why the Gerudo seem less sophisticated due to them not being able to sell you things like the Goron, the Zora, and the Hyrule Castle Town denizens are able to.
But there's nothing to suggest the Gerudo are a nomadic people. As far as we can tell, they permanently reside in their fortress, and if they're close enough to Hyrule to raid and steal from the people who live there, wouldn't that also mean that they're close enough to Hyrule to engage in trade? There's no shortage of shops and other vendors across Hyrule, but there's no Gerudo shop. Why not? Why are the Gerudo depicted here as less sophisticated than the rock and fish people? The only merchant in the Gerudo Desert is this unnamed barefoot guy with a huge nose who sits cross-legged on a flying carpet and sells you a mysterious item for an upfront payment of 200 rupees.
So anyway, we are going to cover all of our points here, don't worry. But anyway, there are a few reasons why the Gerudo are seen negatively. It's simple. It's because of Ganondorf, the two evil Gerudo witches like Kome and Kotake, and also the Gerudo resorting to theft as they have limited options due to the harsh nature of their environment, as mentioned earlier in part 1. As we will see with Gerudo, the reason they are stigmatized as a race within the universe, at least until the end of Ocarina of Time's end credits in the adult timeline, is that Ganondorf, the king of the Gerudo, himself gave them a bad rep by his actions. By Gerudo's own words, she's second in command of the Gerudo people, by the way, she said, "Though we're both thieves, I am completely different from Ganondorf. With his followers, he stole from women and children and even killed people." The reason the Gerudo, as an other, were dealt a bad hand throughout Ocarina of Time was that Ganondorf's own actions, by association with the Gerudo, did the bad things Nabooru mentioned. He also cursed the Great Deku Tree and Lord Jabu Jabu, and he even blocked the entrance to the Goron's food supply, Dodongo's Cavern. Aside from Ganondorf's own actions, the Gerudo did bad things like steal things and even people. The carpenters from Kakariko Village and Link himself, if Link gets caught, by association with Ganondorf. It's no wonder that many people in Hyrule didn't like the Gerudo, because Ganondorf's actions made them look bad as a race. Furthermore, because the Gerudo lived in inhospitable desert land, as mentioned earlier, it's no wonder that it's believed that they steal out of necessity and people didn't like them. And aside from the actions of Ganondorf, the Gerudo also have a baggage of being considered misandrous, as mentioned by the Carpenters. It's not until Link defeats many of the Gerudo guards and rescues the imprisoned Carpenters that one of the Gerudo, Nabooru's appointed chief, recognizes Link as a worthy man in terms of skill, like Ganondorf, and grants him the Gerudo's membership card, allowing him to roam around the Gerudo's fortress without getting caught. After Link defeats Ganondorf in the game, the Gerudo can be seen celebrating and dancing with other races at Lon Lon Ranch, at least in the adult timeline, indicating that they were misunderstood as a race due to Ganondorf's influence and that they can, in fact, coexist with other races. Even after Link defeats Koumei and Kotake, the Carpenters think the Gerudo people as a whole aren't so bad after all. So Skitty was clearly lacking the context of why the Gerudo were depicted negatively by other Hyrulean societies. I can understand why Skitty observed how the Gerudo were treated negatively as an other, though before Link defeated Ganon, it's true that a lot of Hyruleans would react negatively to the Gerudo mask if you were to speak to them. There was at least one who thought of the Gerudo as beautiful, and even Talon from Lon Lon Ranch said the Gerudo mask reminded him of his wife. After explaining these nuances and how misunderstood the Gerudo were by Ganondorf's desire to conquer Hyrule, coupled with the dark sorcery that many Gerudo have, such as Ganondorf and his split mothers Koumei and Kotake, we can see that Nintendo was going for a fantasy approach with them as being portrayed as a misunderstood race. Even though a few bad apples like Ganondorf and his witch of a mother defiled the reputation of the Gerudo, many of the Gerudo were not evil like these three were. And yes, despite many Gerudo still being thieves, they still have boundaries regarding certain actions. Nabooru, chief of the Gerudo, says that Ganondorf killed people and stole from women and children, and Koumei and Kotake brainwashed other Gerudo and used them as iron knuckles, insinuating that these iniquities went too far, morally speaking. In Skitty's video, whilst replying to Octorok Reviews' video on defending the Gerudo, while I do agree that Octorok Reviews was trying to defend the Gerudo as a misunderstood other due to being associated with Ganondorf when he was alive, I do see Skitty's skepticism here in this instance where she points out that there isn't enough evidence to support some of Octo's claims of them intentionally choosing this aesthetic to appeal to men, specifically for the adult Gerudo.
Midriff thing is absolutely intentional. Yes, the Gerudo sexualize themselves on purpose because they're trying to attract men from other tribes. That's literally what the survival of their entire species is predicated on.
No, the Gerudo do not sexualize themselves on purpose because they aren't real. They're characters in a video game that were created by humans, just like you and me.
Though to be fair to Octorok's inferences, it is admittedly understandable why they try to at least look beautiful to attract more men their way, seeing as only one Gerudo male is born once a century, so it's harder for them as a people to reproduce.
Same goes for when he says that the Gerudo consider men to be
useless for anything other than breeding.
This is something he's imagining that's not in the text of the game. He says both in this video and in his Ocarina of Time review that the Gerudo section of the game is
meant to explore Link's developing sexuality as he grows into adulthood.
Regarding Octorok's claim about Link's awakening, I mean, if you were at least to consider his view through the journey through the lens of a rite of passage into adulthood, I can understand. Especially when you look at the dialogue of the sages Link rescues, in which they acknowledge the maturity of his deeds and progress.
And just to be crystal clear, it is never stated anywhere in Ocarina of Time that the Gerudo kidnap men in order to sexually assault them so they can reproduce. The only time we hear about Gerudo women taking Hylian partners is when talking to this Gossip Stone, which says that they sometimes come to Castletown to look for boyfriends.
However, when we analyze Octorok's clip of him saying that the Gerudo likely capture men for procreational reasons, it's pretty disingenuous of Skitty to assert that he meant the non-consensual stuff.
The only way they can continue to reproduce in the interim is by taking men from other tribes, in this case the Hylians, and using them to, well, you know. Oftentimes, this activity is achieved through seduction and thus completely consensual. Seduction and thus completely consensual. Seduction and thus completely consensual. Because actually capturing men can be quite difficult when your race is made up entirely of small, beautiful women.
But yes, Skitty has a point that there is no explicit evidence that Gerudo kidnapped men to do the snuggle struggle with them. Ugh. In one clip, Octo even specifies that they mostly procreate through consent anyway, not by force. I would hope, anyway. I also doubt the Gerudo would do something non-consensual and evil like that anyway, especially if we go by Nibiru's moral codes that she applied to Ganondorf. Stealing from women and children and killing people are bad, as stated by Nibiru, so it'd then be fair to consider that she and other Gerudo would be against doing something non-consensual like that to men, according to Nibiru's moral standards. Also, it'd be hard for Nintendo to be on the nose with that kind of detail anyway, as this game is not rated M for mature, and they get in huge trouble. And while the Gerudo do capture men, why do they keep them alive? There are still lingering questions regarding this in-game detail. Don't get me wrong, I don't know if I'd go as far as to assert that the Gerudo do things with men not consensually, but I do think it's at least possible that they may try to at least entice them and convince them to agree to procreate. If not, why don't the Gerudo just kill them on the spot? Seeing as the Gerudo have to go to Hyrule Castletown to find boyfriends, is it a stretch to say that they try to seduce the men they capture to encourage procreation? Some of it could be consensual, but some of it may not be. These questions speak to how vast the world of Zelda can be, albeit scary questions. This type of analysis isn't new, though. Just look at all the theories of the Shadow Temple and the bloody history of Hyrule, and its implications of the evil people who got punished there. It's really interesting. Check it out. So, while Skitty reasonably points out the lack of evidence to her credit, I also think Octorok is justified in how he goes about making his inferences in his video. In short, even though the Gerudo were othered in a way that Skitty Bitty didn't agree with, some of what Octorok reviews said, as well as what I have just shown you, illustrate how nuanced their morality and culture were. The Gerudo were dealt a bad hand due to the actions of Ganondorf and Kome and Kotake, sure. And to reiterate, at the end of Ocarina of Time, the denizens of Hyrule are seen celebrating with the Gerudo, recognizing them as a misunderstood other. In addition, since the Gerudo aren't stand-ins for anything or anyone Middle Eastern, their fictional portrayal makes them and their story unproblematic. Case closed. Next up. Part 3. Viewing the Gerudo through a different lens. The viewing of art can be subjective. As mentioned earlier, Skitty emphasized that she doesn't think Nintendo intended for the Gerudo to come off as racist.
I still love the Zelda series, and I don't think Nintendo did this out of some conscious will to do harm. I don't think the developers of these games are evil, racist monsters.
The problem with her view is that it's just wrong. The Gerudo are not Middle Eastern depictions. The Gerudo are Gerudo. I understand where Skitty would be coming from if Nintendo went out of their way by explicitly making them Middle Eastern, but in this part I will prove that they are not racist depictions because there is enough evidence to showcase that's not what Nintendo meant for the Gerudo to represent. Also, it depends on which lens you view the Gerudo through, whether it be an Orientalist one or a fictional one. For example, if we were to side with Skitty, saying that if you were to view the Gerudo as an allegory for Orientalist stereotypes, I can see where she's coming from in that sense, but we will see that lens falls apart as Nintendo seems to walk away from that with how they handle the Gerudo in-game. However, even claims that the Gerudo are racist stereotypes are wrong. I am going to steelman her argument and try to make it work. In order for something to be Orientalist, it requires something to represent the Middle East from a Western view, which the Gerudo and their region do not even fit in. Besides, even if Nintendo did intend for them to be Orientalist, then they would have not only kept the original iconographical context of the original first two versions 1.1 and 1.2, but they'd also be more on the nose about it and rename the Gerudo the Middle Eastern race in the game itself. Plus, there would probably be Iranian and Islamic text and iconography, for example, in later versions of Ocarina of Time at least. And to further bury Skitty's argument, the first problematic versions of Ocarina of Time first came out in 1998. Since then, there have been different versions of the game, including the 3DS remaster, where Nintendo altered many of the same images and Fire Temple music that would be seen as controversial. So even going back to 2011 with the most recent released version as of July 2026, the 3DS version, Nintendo kept these same aesthetics of the Gerudo, implying that they intend to keep the Gerudo as fictional and totally separate from the real world like Skitty is concerned about. But now, to give Skitty the benefit of the doubt, we are going to actually make Skitty's argument work by framing the Gerudo as explicit Orientalist propaganda.
To be clear, there's nothing wrong with having a character or even a group of characters in a fictional setting that exists to give an outsider's perspective on the society in which the story takes place. The problem arises when that difference is communicated using symbolism loaded with historical and political baggage. If you're not compelled by the argument that this perpetuates harmful ideas about real-world people, at least consider that it's lazy world-building. After all, you don't need to write a fleshed-out group of outsiders if you can just plaster your fictional race with iconography that's historically been used to denote the other.
Just a quick recap of what Orientalism means. It's a way of representing the East as something fundamentally exotic, but ultimately knowable from the outside. So, to truly make the Gerudo Orientalist and racist towards Middle Easterners, first, all the other Hyruleans would have to refer to the Gerudo not by Middle Easterners, but by calling them Muslims, Arabs, Persians, or Iranians as some examples. Also, none of the Gerudo would have pointed ears, and they would have a religion that explicitly mirrors religions practiced in the Middle East, but the Gerudo already have their own fictional religion. They instead worship the goddess of the sand, the desert goddess to be exact. Also, to make the Gerudo more akin to real Middle Easterners, they would not have only one male every 100 years, like the Gerudo do. Plus, if Nintendo really wanted to emphasize the Gerudo culture being synonymous with Middle Eastern cultures, you would definitely be seeing even more iconography like these Iranian symbols I'm displaying before you, and you'd likely discover explicit readings of something like the Quran, for example, plastered inside and outside their fortress. And as stated before, though yes, the first versions of Ocarina of Time did have some iconography that mirrored an Islamic symbol, but Nintendo changed it, likely to establish that Nintendo isn't equating the Gerudo with real-world Islam or anything Middle Eastern. I understand what Skitty is concerned about, but it's not like there's Gerudo in-game shouting Allahu Akbar or anything.
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
After the initial retcon version of Ocarina of Time, none of those explicitly Orientalist things I mentioned are even happening today. With all this in mind, the evidence is clear that the Gerudo are framed as a fictional race and not meant to be Middle Eastern stand-ins, hence why it'd be very weird for someone like Skitty Bitty to point at a fantastical race of desert dwellers and think they're racist stereotypes when Nintendo has made it abundantly clear that they are not supposed to be Middle Easterners. I know this is getting repetitive, but I will say, again, to Skitty, the Gerudo are the Gerudo. The Gerudo are not trying to be real-life Middle Easterners. Yes, they were designed to be a fictional race. That's it. Additionally, the Gerudo Valley, the Gerudo's home region in Ocarina of Time, isn't even located in the Middle East, as you can see. Nor is it even east, but west, minus the Master Quest version. But the point is it's not called the Middle East. If the game wanted to be truly Orientalist, like Skitty proposes, the Gerudo's region would also need to be in the east of the map, and the locations would be named after real Middle Eastern countries like Iran, Afghanistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, etc. So, Skitty Bitty, ultimately it seems like what you're really trying to do is recontextualize the Gerudo and their culture into something it's not. If Orientalism requires representing the East as exotic other from an outside, often Western, perspective, a Japanese developed fantasy race in a made-up world with heavy, fantastical diversions doesn't really fit. In conclusion, with these facts in mind, Skitty's definition of Orientalism cannot even be applied to the Gerudo and their region. So once again, what Nintendo clearly tried to do with the Gerudo is take from Middle Eastern cultures and then recontextualize the flattening, if you prefer, of these things, however you want to put it, to create not a representation of Middle Eastern cultures, but instead a fictional race. So just because something takes from reality and is inspired by it, it doesn't then make it that thing. And to show that I am consistent with my argument that something can be unique and be categorized as fictional despite being inspired by something in the real world, I will now view the Zelda series through a different lens than Skitty. But first, we need to see Skitty equating Ganondorf's current design to fiction. Beforehand, she understandably notices the Orientalist inspirations for Ganondorf's preliminary aesthetic.
Octo also points out that Ganondorf
Doesn't look anything like a Middle Easterner, Arabic or otherwise.
But anyway, while his final design certainly leans more into fantasy than any real-world inspiration, his concept art looked like this. So do with that what you will.
This is a good example of Nintendo recontextualizing Ganondorf from the Orientalist inspirations, if you want to call it. And even so, you know, the Gerudo in general, like, I know that you're sparing Ganondorf here in terms of him appearing fantastical, but I'm wondering why you don't also consider the other Gerudo to be fantastical, because again, the Gerudo in general are not trying to be Middle Eastern representations. You know, it's all done with fantastical intent. Come on, Skitty. At this point, Skitty mentions Christianity, especially with Ganondorf, and yes, the early Zelda games indeed contained explicit Christian iconography. She notices that the final design of Ocarina of Time is fantastical and that he's a Gerudo, so this is another instance of her admitting the Gerudo are fake. Funny how she makes an exception to Ganondorf being fantastical but not the rest of the designs of the Gerudo themselves. It seems for Ganondorf and the rest of the Gerudo aren't trying to stand in for anything in the real world. I know that me saying that constantly by now is redundant and overdone, but I must keep hitting the message home because this is ultimately why the Gerudo are not problematic. They aren't real, nor are they trying to be. In that clip, she also temporarily views Ganondorf through a Christian lens and views Ganondorf as someone to conquer the Holy Land, aka Hyrule. Remember when Skitty said that we are allowed to view games through a socio-political lens?
Video games, like any art form, are sometimes subject to critical analysis through socio-political lenses. It's been like this for decades. One of the
Well, what about viewing them through other lenses? What about a Christian lens? Just as asserting that Gerudo are racist Oriental depictions is ridiculous, asserting that Zelda games are being depicted as Christian games is also ridiculous. By that same logic, I, as a practicing Christian, can also try to view the Zelda series through a Christian lens and then demand that things should change to promote Christianity better, like she did with trying to better represent the Gerudo and Middle Eastern cultures. I could also make countless Christian correlations via the series with real biblical scripture. In Christianity, Jesus Christ is described as the Son of God, but he is also God in the flesh. He is part of the Trinity, one God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Three people in one, basically. Throughout the Bible and in the New Testament specifically, Jesus Christ defeats evil in many instances, for evil trembles before the power of Jesus Christ. Anyway, going back to how that connects to The Legend of Zelda, the example of me viewing The Legend of Zelda through a Christian lens is me then equating the evil destroying power of Jesus Christ to a very timeless weapon in all of Zelda. Yes, that's right, the legendary Master Sword, Link's famous weapon throughout the series. This holy weapon can be seen as a Christian depiction of Jesus Christ's power to do away with evil. Therefore, because this Christian symbol is in the game, that must make the Zelda games actually Christian games. I mean, earlier in her video, Skitty did say that video games were viewed through socio-political lenses for purposes of critical analysis, so why not a Christian lens? Brace yourself, folks. I am going to make many correlations here to drive home the point. Let's begin. The Legend of Zelda games are actually Christian games, and the Master Sword is an allegory for Jesus Christ's power in repelling the evil of Ganon, who is an allegory for Satan, the evil serpent of old. Evil's Bane. The Master Sword is explicitly forged as a weapon that repels and harms evil beings, such as Ganon and Demise's forces. It glows, seals darkness, and can only be fully wielded by a worthy hero. This mirrors biblical imagery of Christ as the conqueror of evil. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work. 1 John 3:8. The binding of the strong man, Mark 3:27, or Christ's victory over principalities and powers, Colossians 2:15. The sword's purifying or repelling quality echoes the idea of holiness as inherently antagonistic to evil. Divine origin and the worthy wielder. The sword has a sacred pedigree, often linked to the goddess Hylia, or divine forging, or the hero chosen by the gods. Link can pull and master it without harm. This loosely parallels Christ as the divine agent empowered by the Father, or even the sword of the Lord. Isaiah 27:1, Revelation 19:15, where a sharp sword comes from Christ's mouth, symbolizing his authoritative word and judgment. The hero of courage or time motif has faint messianic echoes, a recurring savior figure across ages. Sword symbolism in the Bible. Scripture frequently uses the sword for divine truth, judgment, and spiritual warfare. Ephesians 6:17. Sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Hebrews 4:12. Sharper than any double-edged sword. The Master Sword functions similarly as an active, almost living instrument against darkness rather than a generic weapon. These elements make the Master Sword a natural archetypal stand-in for righteous power triumphing over evil, which Christianity expresses supremely in Christ. As you can see, I too can also look at things in the Zelda universe and also depict them as stand-ins for biblical scripture in Christianity. But that doesn't then confirm that these Zelda games are inherently Christian, nor did Nintendo ultimately have that in mind with their intent, at least in Zelda games beyond A Link to the Past. Nintendo clearly wanted to have an endgame religion, Hylia and the Three Golden Goddesses as some examples. Their intent with the Christian inspiration was crafting a unique fantasy, not necessarily promoting these Christian values or being a stand-in for Christianity in general. What do I mean? Well, I will demonstrate the flaws with viewing the series through a Christian lens, just as there are viewing it through an Orientalist lens. I will showcase that these things could be contradictory to this worldview to prove that Zelda is not trying to reflect a real-world religion like Christianity. Take, for instance, Patro from Skyward Sword. He's depicted as a good demon. Also, Link can bargain with the demonic statue in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom respectively, and exchange essences, health and stamina. These concepts can be seen as satanic and don't mix the heroic nature of Link and values of Christianity. Plus, the mentioning of other religions like Buddha in Skyward Sword, for example, or the Nazca lines of Peru in Tears of the Kingdom, would conflict with Christianity's doctrine of not worshipping other gods, for worshipping or having other gods besides the Almighty is considered a sin in Christianity. By the way, just like with the Orientalist inspirations of crafting the Gerudo, it's obvious that Nintendo was inspired by various religions to create their own fantastical world. And it was not done to bring in religions or cultures from the real world and to represent them accurately. Further illustrating that the Gerudo are stand-ins for a fantasy race, not Middle Eastern stereotypes. As you can see, the viewing of art can be subjective. Someone can look at various things in Zelda through many lenses and recontextualize them to align with their worldviews and biases. I, as a Christian, can look at The Legend of Zelda through a Christian lens and say it's a Christian franchise, but as I've illustrated with Patro, that assessment is invalid. The Legend of Zelda is not a Christian franchise, though it was initially inspired by Christianity. So with all that in mind, the same can be said of the Gerudo being viewed from an Orientalist lens, like Skitty is doing. It's okay for her to view them through those lenses, but it's not valid for her to claim that the fictional Gerudo are racist, especially with the evidence I just gave in Nintendo's persistence to differentiate them from iconography and chanting associated with the Middle East. By the way, if there was a similar situation to what Skitty is concerned about, promoting negative or positive stereotypes, but it instead be applied to Christianity and not Orientalism, and there was a fictional race in Zelda that was inspired by negative depictions of Christians, so long as they framed the race as fantastical and weren't on the nose about it, I wouldn't mind that hypothetical either. And if, in contrast, Nintendo tried to make the Zelda series biblically accurate to fit my Christian lens and change it, I'd be against it too, just as I am against Skitty's insistence to change the aesthetic of the Gerudo in the future of the series, because the Bible exists, and I could just go read that instead if I wanted true biblical accuracy. We're almost done with part 3, just bear with me a little longer. By the way, I'm sure Nintendo has been better at showing that they are distancing themselves from trying to replicate real-world cultures and religions. For example, when Majora's Mask came out in 2000, if we look at the architecture of the stone tower and its concept of being a tall tower, you may see it possibly being inspired by the Tower of Babel from the Bible, given a Christian lens. I believe that that game is fantasy and is probably just borrowing elements from that event in the Bible. However, the Stone Tower Temple originally had iconography of an upside-down Triforce on its blocks in the original version. If I had wanted to, I could be like Skitty here and instigate complaints and say,
I want the Zelda games to be biblically positive and more respectful towards Christianity in the later installments, and not blasphemous.
And I could have complained about the Stone Tower imagery of Majora's Mask, suggesting that Nintendo was disrespecting the Holy Trinity, which is what the Triforce can be viewed as an allegory for via a Christian lens. This imagery was later removed in the 3DS version in 2015, but no, I do not think that the depiction of Stone Tower Temple or its original iconography is problematic. I love both versions of it. I'm aware that the game is trying to be its own thing with recontextualization, and it is not trying to attack Christianity. I think it is instead attacking the golden goddesses of Hyrule. So even if Nintendo didn't change this upside-down Triforce, I wouldn't be offended, nor would I demand that they'd be more sensitive with the way that they go about it, because I know that they're just trying to make something unique and alive inside of its game world. It doesn't need to go out of its way to avoid offending Christians or Middle Easterners. So in essence, Nintendo's approach is ultimately harmless overall. Besides, The Legend of Zelda, again, is fictional, and I'd want to keep it that way. Other people and I want the franchise to stay as fantasy and a virtual vehicle for entertainment and escapism. Therefore, this part of the video concludes the argument that the Gerudo are not racist stand-ins, but a fantastical race of desert dwellers that Nintendo intended for fiction. And the evidence that Nintendo shied away from doubling down on these supposed Orientalist tropes confirms this. They removed much of the eerie resemblance to Islamic iconography in versions 1.0 and 1.1 in Ocarina of Time. So no changes for the Gerudo or their designs are needed. I can end my video there, but we're not done with Skitty Bitty's video just yet. After all, I created this video to defend the preservation of the Gerudo's designs and concept as merely a fantastical race, and I got a bit more to say. But don't forget, guys, later in her video, Skitty may have an idea for how to best represent the Gerudo in a non-offensive way, so stay tuned for that. Part 4. How all this started and why we need to gatekeep our hobbies. Now, many of you who know Skitty Bitty may be wondering why I refer to Skitty by she instead of they, and I'm not going to go too into this, but out of true respect for Skitty, at least what I believe is actually respectful, I think it'd be more respectful to refer to Skitty as a she, because when you refer to one person, I repeat, one person, as a they in a singular pronoun context instead of a he or she, like this, some people are going to think the person is a space alien or something. It just makes her sound non-human, and Skitty is human, like the rest of us. So, I'm not doing that. And that's that. You're not going to force me to use intellectually dishonest language. Calling her a they sounds way more dehumanizing when you get to the bottom of it. And I just need to say this again. I don't hate Skitty Bitty, nor do I encourage harassment or bullying towards her or anyone else mentioned in this video. I just disagree with her argument and that other people are promoting this nothing burger of a problem of a fictional race I adore, and I simply just want to pursue the truth on this topic. Moving on. So this whole Gerudo drama of this year started when YouTubers Octorok Reviews and Skitty Bitty made their videos on the Gerudo discussing whether or not they were Orientalist stand-ins and therefore racist towards Middle Easterners. In this part of the video, I'm going to be mentioning real-world politics for a brief moment and quickly explain why I think Nintendo and pretty much all their forms of entertainment should distance themselves from real-world politics. But I promise you, it connects to the importance of preserving the in-world cultural context of the Gerudo. And if Skitty Bitty and her followers are watching this video and thinking I'm some shud or right-winger, guess what? I am not politically a conservative, Republican, or even a Trump supporter. None of that. As a matter of fact, I used to be a leftist, and that was a good one. I left the left because of far-left ideas infiltrating pop culture and reframing a lot of art as preachy political propaganda to validate leftist beliefs. And thus, I am afraid that this is what will happen with the Gerudo also. I've seen this left-wing fanaticism, woke stuff, whatever you want to call it, destroy other franchises of movies and games, and that's why I made this video. To hopefully defend the Gerudo, and hopefully all of Zelda as well, in hopes that I can stop people like Skitty Bitty from potentially destroying another franchise via retconning. You know what? When I commented on X towards one of Skitty's fans regarding there only being two genders, and that the word gender was, and can, still be used as a euphemism for sex, male or female, Skitty made the mistake of responding to me with an image of Tamagotchi Life Living the Dream, showing a non-binary option. This reply of yours was not the own you thought it was, Skitty. You actually confirm my concern for why I had to make a video like this. I'm glad Skitty replied with this, because it shows that Nintendo caved in to leftist propaganda such as this and put in the non-binary option. As a matter of fact, this is a big deal, because not only did Skitty Bitty show me that Nintendo actually listens to leftists like this, but it also further highlights how Nintendo has been very open with their preference for politics, hint hint, leftism. I am against them being openly political like this. I don't care if it's left-wing or right-wing. Nintendo is supposed to be a family-friendly company after all, meant to entertain people, so putting in controversial stuff like this is not smart, whether you agree or disagree with it. If Nintendo is established with the left via politics of their games, I am definitely more worried now that they very likely may tweak the designs of the Gerudo because of people like Skitty spreading false information and saying that they're racist and Orientalist, which they're not. So my approach with this video is justified, and I know people are going to tell me as a response to this video, oh well, LGBTQ people exist. I know, I have a gay friend actually, and get along with him just fine. But right-wingers, left-wingers, and religious people exist too. Does that mean we should use art to promote propaganda and validate their beliefs on the nose like this? No! As mentioned earlier, Nintendo censored both Christian and Islamic iconography that was previously on the Zelda franchise. This game series is for escapism! Despite my endeavors, Nintendo is likely going to give in to the demand of leftist Nintendo fans anyway, seeing as most Nintendo fans seem to lean that way politically, which isn't a problem, but I hate it when they involve politics like this into video games. And this same mindset also concerned me and pressured me to make this video on the Gerudo, especially with the Ocarina of Time remake released this year. Games should be free of both politics and religion. I don't care if it's right-wing or left-wing or if anything from any religion is put in, Christian or not. Keep it all out. And again, this is not a political video, and I'm trying to just keep art as fiction. And don't any of you leftist fanatics dare try to assert all art is political. I will make another video on that, debunking that someday probably. But anyway, especially when the Department of Homeland Security put out political videos using your favorite franchises as fodder for promoting ICE, like Pokemon. Anyway, we just want to be entertained, not lectured. I don't want a political battleground weaponizing our video games, shows, or movies. End of story. With all that said and done, let's get back to Skitty Bitty's video.
But also, and I admit this is less important to me, but it is important to others, which I respect, they add diversity to a game series that otherwise is centered around European-looking characters. I'm really not sure what these people envision the Zelda series looking like without its current world-building structure, but if it's anything like the fantasy slop we see on TV these days, where every cast of characters look like they came straight out of LA, then they're making a big mistake. What you have with a series like Zelda or The Elder Scrolls is a fantasy story with dynamic, proper representation. You can have women of color appear in your European-based fantasy story if you take the time to write a group of people with an interesting history and culture that fits into that world perfectly.
Okay, so first off, I appreciate him giving us the disclaimer that he doesn't care about diversity and that he's strictly using that concept for point scoring.
What Dr. Rock reviews may have meant was that diverse characters can be great in fiction, but that they should first lead by being well-written characters, not being great from the get-go with identity politics. That's my guess. I have a good example of this, actually. Disney's Atlantis: The Last Empire. It's not preachy, and it has likable characters that just so happen to be ethnically diverse. You can have a diverse cast of characters, or even the left-wing subtext of a story, so long as you prioritize the story and don't frame it as left-wing propaganda, like a drug PSA. And this relates to the Gerudo because they are just a really cool race of desert dwellers that happen to be diverse, ethnically. The Zelda universe. Skitty later admits in the rest of her video that Hyrule isn't real.
His comparison to Zelda, where he says, you can have women of color appear in your European-based fantasy story if you take the time to write a group of people with an interesting history and culture, is proof that he sees the presence of women of color in a fantasy story as something that needs to be justified, even though Hyrule is not actually Europe.
Yes, Hyrule isn't real. You know what else isn't real? The Gerudo. And the Gerudo Valley region is not meant to represent the Middle East. By your admission, Skitty, you claim that Hyrule is not actual Europe despite being inspired by it. So, why can't you also see the Gerudo as not trying to be actual Middle Easterners? You saying this actually contradicts your whole argument that the Gerudo are Middle Eastern stand-ins and therefore racist depictions of them. Near the end of the video, Skitty goes on to insult Octorok and insinuate he's a horrible person for his political beliefs.
But Octo has recently partnered up with a tea company called The Dragon's Treasure. Here are just some of the things this guy is elected to post on his brand account. And when pressed, he doubled down, saying he stands by everything he's posted. I don't want to litigate petty Twitter drama in this video about Orientalism, but this stuff is too disturbing to ignore. And Octo's refusal to acknowledge, let alone condemn, any of the vile things this guy has publicly said on the Twitter account for the brand he's affiliated with speaks volumes. Then again, he posts shit like this, and this, and this, and he seems to be a big fan of Asmongold, even using clips from him in his tea ad.
Again, that delves into politics, but for someone claiming that he is a terrible person, she made this joke near the start of July about the late Charlie Kirk getting assassinated. So do with that what you will. And regarding politics, you're right, Skitty. Real politics are disturbing. You know what would be a good idea right now? Go into a fantastical virtual world to get your mind off such things, which is kind of what Nintendo intended with fictional races like the Gerudo, let alone The Legend of Zelda in its entirety. It's almost like that's why people are trying to stop you from 100% connecting it to real-world views like the Middle East, because you are recontextualizing them to symbolize something they are not. Thus, the Gerudo are not racist. You just want to play Zelda and not think of the real world. That's it. You could look at the Gerudo through an Orientalist lens, Skitty Bitty, but please, keep it to yourself and try not to demand to change the aesthetic context of the Gerudo, or the Zelda games, or the future Zelda games. Their designs can stay the same. I don't even think of anyone or anything Middle Eastern or Orientalist when I see their apparel. If that makes you feel any better, you know? This whole Orientalist issue is such a huge nothing burger. Anywho, with the video nearly done, we must again ponder Skitty's initial statement regarding the Gerudo. She claims that she doesn't think the answer is to remove or retcon them. Perhaps Skitty does have a solution to how the Gerudo can be changed to not offend anybody. This is the moment we have all been waiting for. Brace yourself, folks. So let's hear what her answer is. Here we go. Let's do this.
Okay, so I don't want to see the Gerudo removed from the Zelda series, but I still take issue with some aspects of how they're depicted. The obvious question is what my solution would be to those issues, and luckily I have a number of different answers. First, it's important to acknowledge that the Gerudo have already come a long way. The Gerudo in the Wild era stand head and shoulders above their counterparts in the N64, both literally and figuratively. I think the increased variety of hairstyles, skin tones, and face shapes is a step in the right direction, and it's especially nice to see Gerudo out-traveling the world. I also appreciate the Gerudo's appearance in Echoes of Wisdom, something Octo doesn't even mention in his video. The Gerudo in Echoes of Wisdom are basically just doing their own thing. They're concerned about the rifts, same as everyone else, and they're not singled out or treated with suspicion. They still wear the stereotypical outfits, and Zelda herself can wear one too, but on the whole it's still an improvement. I also appreciate the continuity between Rotana in the Wild era games and Torma in Echoes of Wisdom. Math, science, and medicine as we know it wouldn't be the same without contributions of scholars like Ibn Sina and Al-Khwarizmi, so it's really cool to see the beginnings of a pattern of Gerudo characters who have a passion for research. In terms of changes I would advise making, let's start with the outfits. The pointy shoes and crop tops have got to go.
I disagree, they can stay.
No one in their right mind would be showing this much skin under the blazing desert sun, and there's no way Riju is doing all of that in heels.
Well, I mean, it still is a work of fiction. Not everything has to make perfect sense. I mean, realistically, Link shouldn't even be able to take out his sword from his sheath the way he does. So, if you're able to suspend your disbelief for that, why not suspend your disbelief for a fantastical race of desert-dwelling people having the ability to withstand the sun? Again, it's fiction. Not everything has to represent reality. Anyway, while I do agree that it is interesting to see the evolution of the Gerudo expanding and to see them going out of their homelands and doing their own thing, and it's also interesting to see how they even adopted things like using sand seals for transportation, I think their designs still look pretty cool, and I just think that, all this, is still subjective. Like, I don't think that their designs are problematic. Anyway, I am still curious to see what your solution is, so let's hear it.
Instead of randomly choosing costume pieces from a slew of different cultures, focus on one to ground your inspiration in, and actually do the necessary research to depict it accurately. The same goes for their weapons and other accessories. I would offer more suggestions, but the truth is that I actually don't know how to best represent these cultures.
So that's her answer. She doesn't even know. Are you serious? Not only does she contradict herself from earlier, when she said she didn't want to retcon the Gerudo, yet you can see that she is still arguing for future iterative improvements, which implies that these improvements therefore ruin the overall consistency of the Gerudo's aesthetics. And guess what? That is technically still a retcon! I mean, what if in 5 years from now, those same improvements are not offensive enough? Would the Gerudo then need to go under another aesthetic change? Eventually, the Gerudo would become unrecognizable in probably 10 years even. In theory, at least. The desire for the Gerudo to look less problematic is one thing, but what she is expecting of Nintendo regarding this demand is ludicrous. Now, to be fair to Skitty, she eventually did come up with a non-offensive redesign, and even though she tried to respectfully represent Middle Eastern people like Palestinians in this redesign, she effectively not only retconned the Gerudo, but she also culturally assimilated the Gerudo into something they weren't. Again, the Gerudo are not trying to be Middle Eastern representatives. This means that they are also not Palestinian stand-ins. So, the accuracy for the design is ultimately in vain. Sorry, Skitty. Gerudo live in Gerudo Valley, not Palestine. Anyway. The previous Gerudo designs that Skitty claimed were problematic had been used so much throughout the series that they established the Gerudo's identity as a culture and world. By giving them these new ones that she's proposing, she will make it harder for people to accurately identify the Gerudo in theory, and they may lose their sense of identity. Anyone else think at this point that changing the Gerudo's design for being quote-unquote racist is ironically a sign of Gerudophobia? Of course I'm joking about the Gerudophobia thing, but what else would these changes to the Gerudo even entail? Like, for example, would that mean that people who cosplay as Gerudo in real life can no longer do so because even they would appear as Orientalist. At least consider the implications of carrying out these aesthetic revisions and saying that the Gerudo are actually racist against Middle Easterners. Something is not lining up here. Come on, guys. And look, I get that you don't want to offend anybody if something appears too on the nose about culture, religion, or touchy subject. I get that. But at this point, Skitty's proposed approaches would really discourage me, at least, from even attempting art, if I did art, because she specifies that I must be this meticulous to such an extremely high degree. Because if you have to worry this much about stepping on that many eggshells to avoid offending someone in the real world, your creativity will be extremely limited. There's no way around it. I'm sorry, but Skitty's preference for how Nintendo would go about this is very unrealistic. By the way, everything she says about picking one culture to base your fiction on is just her opinion. Many others and I think the Gerudo look cool as is, and if you tweak their designs enough, as I just mentioned in recontextualizing them, they may end up losing their identity in a sense, and the Gerudo have retained consistency in their accumulative aesthetic over the past 2 decades. And again, it's not trying to symbolize the Middle East. It's not a Middle Eastern simulator. Zelda is a fantasy game. So no, you are wrong here, Skitty. No research is needed in studying the Middle East for the Gerudo's aesthetics to respectfully represent them, because again, they're not trying to be that. Besides, at that point, if you're an artist and you don't want to risk offending a social justice warrior or a culture or a religion, you might as well not even bother making art at all. Mindsets like yours, Skitty, ruin nerd culture and art in general. Someone had to say it. Sorry. So, in conclusion, the Gerudo's design can stay the same and should stay the same. I will go ahead and just say this at least. It'd be fair for Skitty to just say that the designing of the Gerudo was inspired by Orientalist tropes. Okay. However, to then suggest that the Gerudo are racist towards Middle Easterners is incorrect and sounds so disingenuous. The whole faulty ordeal is why people are thinking you were instigating on social media regarding this topic, Skitty. The Gerudo are not trying to represent Middle Easterners, as the games heavily suggest this separation via Nintendo's choices, as we discussed earlier. And as for your concerns minus your mention of the Gerudo being problematic, I have never heard of someone complain about the Gerudo being a so-called racist stereotype until this news blew up on social media this year. And if there were complaints, Skitty, they were resolved with the patches of Ocarina of Time in 1998. From that point, up until 2011 with the 3DS remake of Ocarina of Time, I never even heard complaints from Middle Easterners about the Gerudo. And in 2011 with the 3DS remake, the Gerudo's aesthetics of the Zelda series overall remained the same since. And that time gap between the two games is at least 12 years. So you're not convincing anyone with your supposed concerns of fiction affecting reality with political Orientalist baggage. Otherwise, there would be more complaints and their designs would have been changed in that 3DS remaster. And to further calm down Skitty's concerns, there are far more important issues in the real world for people in the Middle East to worry about. Regardless, so I don't know why you're focusing on a video game of all things to place your concern on. It's just trying to be an adventure fantasy, not a Middle Eastern simulator, as I've stated multiple times already. I strongly doubt most Middle Easterners would even get upset about a video game that is clearly and deliberately not trying to represent them. And so, the Gerudo are harmless. They're make-believe, and you don't have to worry about them. They're not real, nor are they racist. So let's recap. Why are they inoffensive, Skitty?
Because they aren't real.
Bingo, and they're not trying to be anything real either. We're gonna resume what little is left of Skitty Bitty's video, I promise. I just need to address a few things really quick. So to end this part, I just brought up all the examples of politics coming into a fictional hobby to illustrate why I have concerns with the discussions about all these things regarding left-wing political influence. And I am now having the same worries with the Gerudo, especially given how influential and popular people like Skitty and Bia Silent Princess are. I don't hate them, but the bogus stuff they say, like the Gerudo being Orientalist and racist, is just insane, and I am calling it out. Part 5. Final Thoughts. In conclusion, I simply wish for the Gerudo to remain the same aesthetically, and throughout this video essay, I have proven that though they are inspired by Orientalist tropes, they are not true Middle Eastern stand-ins, so they cannot be racist stereotypes. I tried to talk with Skitty Bitty about this on X, but she literally reposted my post, and she didn't even respond to me. Her followers did though. Here are a couple more of my X posts showing my concern about this topic. To clarify the last part where I stated that Nintendo wasn't on the nose with the portrayal of the Gerudo, I meant through the inspiration of the Gerudo, it can be viewed as an Orientalist approach. Nintendo wasn't on the nose about it, nor did they double down with the explicit Orientalist-inspired imagery and references to Middle Eastern people, culture, or geography to constitute them being stand-ins for Middle Easterners. Nevertheless, I will admit a lot of the drama between Skitty and me and her fans came back up a few months later in June when I brought up an image of the Gerudo to one of Skitty's posts on X in which she was responding to Octorok, and I simply proposed that if anyone saw this fictional character as an Orientalist depiction, that they were probably the true racists. I didn't conclude that they actually were racists. I only came in with that approach because to this day, as I'm making this video, I still have a hard time taking people seriously when they claim that a fictional race like the Gerudo are offensive and emulate racism. Many of her fans were very disrespectful to me. However, there was one that I had a civil debate with. He had some interesting insight. But I am not the only one Skitty Bitty has been harassing. As many of you have known, she's been going after Octorok reviews, for example, and even insisted on sending some alleged minors to go after him on X. I'm not going to get into all that. It's a long story, and I recommend you see Harmful Opinions videos on that debacle. I'll link his channel in the description, but basically Skitty has been caught doing inappropriate things with minors. Anyway, so after all that chaos went down, I just wanted to try to destroy her Orientalist argument. That's my point of contention right now. All the other stuff, you know, that's already being taken care of as I speak. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to address this before the Ocarina of Time remake comes out, because the entire Zelda franchise could be changed due to this crazy discussion of the Gerudo being Orientalist. Now we're at the portion of the video where we are wrapping up. So after all that I said, I need to emphasize this once more. Please do not harass or bully Skitty Bitty or Bia, Silent Princess, or anyone else mentioned in this video. But if you want to have a civil dialogue with them and keep things respectful regarding this topic, go for it. One of the main purposes I made this video was because politically correct activists have a problem with keeping the Gerudo the way they are, so I advised that if that's still the case, they can simply leave the fandom if it bothers them that much. If it were up to me, I would not allow Skitty Bitty or Bia to stay in this fandom. Don't get me wrong, this video is not to protect the Zelda franchise for myself. In fact, it's not about me, Skitty, or Octorok. It's for the fans. And while the Zelda fanbase and Nintendo fans as a whole have a lot of leftists in them, other fans still have their same beliefs, which is okay. This franchise is not meant to cater to only the super liberal. Everyone in the world has the right to experience these video games. I myself have seen many videos and X-posts from Octorok reviews, and even I disagree with him on many points, but he's not a monster because of it. He's allowed to have an opinion just as Skitty or anyone else is. Just don't be a fanatic or an extremist about it and force it on people like Skitty has been doing. Though I disagree with some points of Octorok and his Zelda analysis videos, I appreciate that I get the chance to look at the franchise in many ways I never considered before. The point is, someone looking at things differently than you isn't the end of the world all of a sudden. Besides, everyone inherently disagrees with each other on at least one thing anyway. So the takeaway is we should learn to be civil and still disagree with one another. In totality, this video was meant to destroy Skitty Bitty's argument, debunk it, but not to attack her personally. And I want to address this, despite all that I have discussed. I love Middle Eastern people, Arabs, Muslims, LGBTQ people, leftists, right-wingers, and basically all people of different cultures, religions, political leanings, ethnicities, backgrounds, male or female, and even Gerudos if they existed. The point is, I don't worry about who you are or what you believe in. I just want us to enjoy video games like Zelda for fun. And at the end of the day, isn't that the intended purpose for why Nintendo even created these video games? So Skitty basically ends her video off by saying that we should be more open-minded and try to talk to more people and read more books.
The last thing I want to say is just that I think it's ridiculous that this conversation was ever about censorship or shutting down something deemed morally or politically problematic. This video gave me an opportunity to work with some really cool people, to do a lot of fascinating research, and to just generally broaden my horizons. I can't imagine being so close-minded that you take issue with someone interrogating works of art that they care about.
It's not that you can't interrogate works of art, it's when you say stupid things like, oh, this is problematic, or this is racist, and then you're basically instigating and insinuating changing that thing for politically correct purposes, like this with the Gerudo. The Gerudo are problematic and they do not need to be changed.
Thinking about things critically and researching things you have questions about is one of the most important skills you can develop right now. Anti-intellectualism is everywhere in this day and age, and it's important to resist it whenever possible. Read books, talk to people who know more than you, do your best to grow beyond your comfort zone, because that's all we have. If you take nothing else away from this video, let it be that.
And yeah, I think that's a good message, but ultimately, we gotta learn to disagree and not hate each other because of our different opinions. And when I made this video, I made it for the purpose of glorifying Jesus Christ, because God himself represents the truth. So the takeaway with all this is I hope both Skitty, Biddy, and Octorok reviews can go their own ways, focus on their videos to entertain their fans, and use The Legend of Zelda to provide entertainment for people without bringing in real world issues or this chaotic drama. I just want the best for both of them, and I want us to have fun with these video games again. So for a final recap, yes, the Gerudo's inspirations can be called Orientalist, but despite those inspirations, Nintendo recontextualized the Gerudo not to represent Middle Easterners. Therefore, the concept of Orientalism, by definition, cannot be applied to them because neither the Gerudo nor their region are Middle Eastern. So, in conclusion, the Gerudo are not and cannot be Orientalist or racist because they are not trying to be stand-ins for Middle Easterners. Instead, the Gerudo are simply just a fantastical race of desert dwellers in a fantasy video game. Nothing less, nothing more. To end the video off, I'm going to view The Legend of Zelda through a Christian lens one last time to illustrate how the viewing of art can be subjective. So if you conclude something absurd like claiming the Gerudo are actually Orientalist or racist, then I can then say The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is a biblical parallel for illustrating the power of Jesus Christ, symbolized by the usage of the Master Sword to defeat the Serpent, aka Ganondorf. What do I mean? That would be telling. For now, I won't spoil the surprise. Let's see if you can catch the correlations with this limited context. Anyway, it's been an honor. Take care, peace, and have a good day. Or night. See you guys. This has been Ultra Steel.
The serpent deceived me, and I ate.
Serpent, because you've done this, you are more cursed than all cattle, and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel.
And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel.
Warriors, our chief's command is absolute. To the castle!